that's it. That's all. March has now come to an end. It's always a bittersweet moment. In one way, it's kind of nice that I'm not doing as many write-ups in this year, particularly videos and all that stuff. It's a lot of running around. It also marks my favorite time of the year. I'll mention that at the end, but this is kind of the springboard to all things sports. But it's also a little bittersweet. Today will be the longest I have to wait until March Madness starts up again next year. But we'll wait till the end on that. For this particular one, I'm going to try and zoom through. My assumption is if you wanted to watch the games, you watch them or you watch the highlights. So I'm not just going to give you a recap of the games. A couple things I was thinking about during the games, then we'll get on to our pool, celebrate our winners. Here we go. As mentioned, we know what happened. In fact, apparently we knew what was going to happen before the tournament even happened. I mentioned it before, but the finalists were our most popular finalists. The champions were our most popular champions. In a year that follows a year, if we look back 12 months ago, if you even had someone in the Final Four, you were freaking lucky. In 2 or 3, you would have won the pool. This year, like I think I mentioned, my dad had 3 out of 4, and he finished in the top 10 essentially. But even having the correct champion and the correct finalist, it was one of those years. You had to have the finalist, you had to have the champion, and then you had to have a bracket from start to finish that got you points. I think if we really looked at it, it was some upsets that were correct early that really helped out, and some teams that traveled. It was an odd year that way too. I mean, there wasn't that many upsets. It typically means the basketball games are quite good, and I'd say for the most part that's true. I don't know if we had the most amazing final weekend in the world. Obviously, I think the peak, the game that came down to the wire was the UConn-Iowa game, but unfortunately that's mired in a call at the end. The rest of the games were kind of non-issues. They were over pretty quick. Even, I would say, Alabama on the men's side, gave UConn the biggest fight. Well, I wouldn't just say that. I mean, scores and actual play dictated that. But they were probably the closest and came to that late rush. Every other team, it was kind of over. You knew it was done, and it was just kind of winding it down. And our finals were kind of the same. I mean, both kind of had the same narrative, and my kind of takeaway was if you have the best player in the nation, because both players of the nation were alive and well in the finals, apparently you can make it all the way to the finals, but you might bump into a team that's a little bit more solid. And I think in both cases, that's what we saw. On the men's side, Zach Edey had a phenomenal game, played pretty much, I think, all but 2 minutes. Scored 37, right? Got 10 rebounds. That's really great for him. Pretty equal split in terms of offense, defense. Kept his fouls down. Had a couple really key block shots kind of in a possession and was a force around the net. But nobody else did anything. He had one teammate in double digits, and everybody else, I mean, you had starters not even scoring and going 0 for in their shooting. You're not going to do much of anything if that's kind of your approach. Whereas UConn, now granted, we knew the Klingon matchup would be good, and you think Edey scored 37, so he must have run Klingon down. And to an extent, he had his way with him in the paint. But I think one of the key things was Klingon was actually able to play him a lot more one-on-one than other people had in the past. There was a lot of double teaming and things with other teams. UConn did when they needed to, but for the most part, he could play him straight up. They kind of let him do his thing, and they just minimized everybody else. So it wasn't that inside-outside game that we saw a lot. The shooters were not as open for Purdue, so it wasn't just that their shooting percentages went down. It really was a team strategy by UConn. And then you look at their scoring, it's more evenly distributed, right? 4 out of their 5 starters were in the double digits. So Newton was the leader with 20, but Castle had a key 15. And like I said, Klingon fought hard in the paint, still got to double digits, not so much in rebounds. But even if you look at their starting 5, everybody on the starting 5 for UConn had 5 or more rebounds. Definition effectively of team effort. You look at the women's side, and if you watch that first quarter only, they were running the show, right? Caitlin was going off. She was having probably one of the best quarters of that we've seen in recent history against a really tough team and a really tough defense. And that was kind of it. Like, Kate Martin hit a couple big shots, but she went 1 for 4. Her first 3 was the only 3 that she made. She did have a couple teammates, get into the paint or make a couple key shots, but ultimately they just couldn't do what they'd done. Especially someone like Stuelke, I think that's how you enunciate her name. Just against the South Carolina bigs, fought hard, but just not the kind of game that she had in the past, and couldn't get the shots off. There was a lot more contested. So Then you look at Carolina, where they're big players. I mean, Cardoso is going to be a top pick. She wasn't even their top scorer; it was a freshman, right? And Tessa Johnson, who came out with 19 and hit some huge shots when they needed it. Or senior Pow Pow, obviously, very didn't take many shots, but made super high percentage and was very efficient and was there when they needed her to be. So I think if we're going to have a takeaway, that's probably it. Is the team game, obviously, this particular year has much more focus. And I think that's something that we see typically in college sports. And the reason why we kind of like it, we did have the star power, but it was consistency that actually won you the title. Skipping the present, this is more about the past and the future. And I think one of the nice parts about a tournament like this is it was so loaded with narratives that it really did kind of give us good indications going forward. Now, the one maybe negative side was the men's game did take a little bit of a hit in terms of ratings. Now, they've been lower for the last few years. I think if you kind of look when they've had big stars, big moments, or big matchups, big narratives coming into it, they've always done quite well. But their floor is not that low, right? There's people that are just going to watch college basketball no matter what on the men's side, and especially when the big teams get in. There is that little bit of bump you get when you get a Carolina team in there, whether it's Duke or UNC. We did have UNC or NC State. If you get the Kentuckys and the Kansases, they come bearing kind of their entourage. Now, UConn is our modern dynasty, right? If you look at it, Hurley has a really complicated offense, and it's one that he has to build for, and he actually prides himself on not dumbing it down. So that takes a few years often to build, and we're kind of seeing 2 in a row. You're going to see a lot kind of move on if we look at the future of guys collegiate. A lot of his guys are scheduled to go or meant to go to the NBA draft. So you'll see a few UConn guys kind of making that transition. That often kind of hurts a little bit. Although it's really hard to make speculations when the transfer portals are still pretty new. And there's a few players out there that might be swinging around. But I think we can assume that those programs will always be fine. And so it's building up the other narratives that the men's game really hasn't had in a while. And I think as we saw, their ratings were around, they weren't like a massive drop in that case. And in some cases, they actually were up on some of the post-COVID years, but they did fine. Obviously, the big news, though, the fact that the women's game kind of made that leap, definitely outperformed them in the final, but even the Final Four. We had mentioned even beforehand having some of the big games, leading into it, and some of the teams and the narratives, especially someone like obviously Caitlin Clark, but certainly each team kind of had its sub-narrative, and obviously South Carolina kind of doing their bit with the undefeated season. So enough things to talk about. And I think, if you ever follow someone or if you read a lot of someone's work or listen to their stuff, whenever they say a point that you've had before, you always have that justification of like validation. Someone else thinks it too, but always I should have written that down because now it's going to sound like I'm just piggybacking. This is actually my case. I heard this, but I've said this in my head for a while. As many of you know, if you know me, I did work in a bar for a little bit. And I was always interested. We were not a sports bar, but there was TVs around and what I put on TV and who would request things. And so I would know something was more of a big deal if someone kind of came in and asked for it on a bar or on a TV so that they could watch it at a different area. But that could be a niche thing. That could be just something they and their friends are into. In Canada, it might be like there's a curling thing on I wasn't aware of, and there's just a little pocket of people that want that. Often it's a certain hockey team or, sometimes, obviously we show the Canadian sports, so basketball and baseball were different, but sometimes people come in and want a different game on or whatever. But every once in a while you get those things that were their own little bits. If it was an international competition or it's just something people were into. But the Firefly effect, was one that I really liked, where if you put something on kind of in a corner somewhere or by a bar or by some place people can stand, is it good enough to start getting people to kind of come over, especially on a more social night where it's not all table-based and people are wandering around? Is it going to bring people to the bar to kind of just watch and see what's going on? And from what I heard and what I read, and this is something I'm taking from someone else, they were at a bar on a Friday, and people were migrating to the TVs. They wanted to be as close to see Iowa play as possible, the Iowa UConn, to an extent South Carolina as well, just because they were into it. But they said it was like, moth to a flame. They were definitely interested. And I think it's obviously not a specific measurement. It's qualitative, not quantitative, but I think it matters because I think the sports are one thing. You're going to have people that want to watch certain sports because they like that sport, they like that team. If you really want to make that step, you got to be part of the narrative, and you got to have things different ways of kind of getting your game out there. And I think that's one of the biggest things that was highlighted from ESPN. They've had the women's game for years, but they never advertised it. You didn't know year by year when the games were on. Even now, if you go to CBS Sports covers the men's game, and if you go, it's one of the major, it's like ESPN where you can just go and see all schedules. They actually outsource you to NCAA.com because they don't even bother with a women's section that just to do scores and scheduling. That kind of says something, right? It wasn't seen as this market, and now it's going to be. So it's going to be interesting to see. And obviously, when you have an athlete leave that was considered kind of the face of the movement, you're going to have a bit of a drop off, but there's enough storylines to keep people going. And I think that's going to be the really interesting part for me looking future in women's basketball is what next? And are we able to keep up this momentum? And is it something that kind of transcends, or is it a one-shot deal? When you look at some of the athletes, remember, like all this conversation, I hate how it's a kid's argument. It's a drunk argument. Who's the GOAT? Who's the greatest? It's just because people like to yell and stuff. And old people like me like to say, oh, you didn't see this player play, so trust me. And back in my day, all that kind of crap that I used to make fun of old people for. And now apparently I'm an old person because I like having those arguments, as long as the other person's not just being ridiculous, even though I feel silly after. So to say Caitlin Clark is the greatest college basketball player on the women's side of all time, we don't know that, but we do know that she's going to be considered one of the most impactful, because whether this is a one-year blip or whether this is the start of something on the women's game, it doesn't mean she's better or worse than the people who came before her. It just means she brought something that people didn't. I think of boxing, right? And I was too young to know the Ali kind of bit. But I remember, Mike Tyson is not the greatest heavyweight of all time. But I was old enough to remember when he fought, everyone cared. It was the biggest deal at that time. He kind of brought people back to heavyweight boxing because I think there wasn't a dominant heavyweight for a little bit there that people really got behind. And even though his career was a little bit shorter and obviously marred with some pretty bad stuff, and now he's fighting influencers for money. But that doesn't take away the fact that he shifted what people thought of it. Say someone like Tiger Woods, he's a different person. He might be one of the best golfers of all time, but it actually doesn't matter. If you were alive in the late 90s, you know the kind of impact he had just by what he did to the Masters and how he continued, and the new demographic he brought in, the new kind of storylines and narratives that came in. People really cared about who he was, what he was doing, and people would watch golf because of it. And I think that's what Caitlin Clark has been this season. Whether she's the greatest, whether we want to compare her to the Breanna Stewarts who just went by, it's tough because Breanna Stewart's teammates were obviously a lot stronger. UConn, if you're not really aware, you have to look at the last 25 years. South Carolina was the 10th team to go undefeated and win the championship. 6 of those 10 are UConn teams, so just bear that in mind. They are the dynasty. They are the program, and they're a feeder system to the WNBA. So it's tough to compare one person versus team, like I just said in the previous point. But here's where we're going to be able to tell. If you know anything about the WNBA, they have a couple solid markets. Vegas is doing quite well. New York's doing quite well. A few other big markets have slid off a little bit. A big market like Chicago or LA, they didn't have great years the last year or two. But that means they're going to be big in the draft. If you actually look, the Sparks in LA have 2 of the top 4 picks. And they're actually right now, depending on where you read, possibly taking 2 dominant post players. One in Cardoso, who we just saw in South Carolina, Brinks, who we saw in Stanford. These are like first and second team all NCAA players. Twin Tower maybe setting up, all that. We know Caitlin's going to a market in Indiana that's not a great team, but that's going to be perfect for her. She's going to be the star of the show. But they're going to struggle for a bit, right? If you even look at the UConn, was it Nika Mule that kind of shut her down a little bit? She's going there too. Then you're going to have a defender on every team. So the transition part's going to be interesting. All that's fine. On the marketing side, let's see what the WNBA does, because they're not advertising enough. If you're not aware, the draft is on the 15th. It's next week. And their season starts real soon. They're a summer league. They're done. They pretty much start as the NBA finishes, and then they're the summer team that kind of links them together. They're done when the NBA starts in October. I believe it's October. You can double check me on that. But they need to market. We need to know where the games are, because I think people are going to want to follow. But if you don't tell people where you are, they're going to find something else real quick. So that is my last pitch. I know no one here works for the WNBA or has any contacts in the WNBA, so don't expect magical things. But that's where this is going to be really interesting for me, is what does this lead to next year, and what does this lead to like right now in the sport itself? I could go on and talk about each one of your brackets as their unique little creations, But I've already looked at all of your stuff a lot, and I think now we just need to get to the hard facts. These are the people who are walking out with a little bit more in their wallet and a little bit more in their heart. So congratulations here. I know this is not the most electric scene in the world, but we can go to their brackets maybe in just a sec if they won. So on the women's side, congratulations, Lara. Your name comes up a little bit later, as you can see down at the bottom here. But huge win for you, and you had it set up where you, if actually it would have gone the other way, you wouldn't have won, but you would have been in the money regardless. So this was the best outcome from you, because now you can join the hall. You can join all the people who have won previously or put a bracket pool behind them. So congratulations on that. We'll be getting in touch with you. Kelly and Connor, you tied for second, so you can do the second, third split as we do. I should say this, if I go to Yahoo right now, it does rank you based on the tiebreaker. It does the plus minus of the score that you pick. I've never really done that, and if you were in a tie here, I got in touch with you. Only one or two people actually wanted to make it a tie, and they were never kind of aligned. Other people were just okay with anything. I like the idea of kind of distribution of wealth in that case. Don't kind of judge me on that. I like it. I think it's nice that people get a little bit. So I like to kind of keep that alive. I just want to open the door in case people want to make things needlessly competitive, because you know I love that too. You're talking about the person who has had students unknowingly involved in picking draft order for fantasy football pools in the past. So yes, I like to make anything a game, so I never want to take that away from you. But typically what happens is not enough people want to do it, and so it ends up being just the tie. From Kelly and Connor, they were fine to kind of divide and conquer here. So congrats, you both kind of split that pot, but that's always nice to get a little bit back after such a great tournament. Unfortunately, that leaves Kelsey and Horst as the last people out. You were the closest to it. You did have South Carolina as a champion, but a lot of people did, unfortunately for you. So it really came down to a few of the decisions and a few of the upsets, especially I would say the fact that the 3 seed, obviously the people who made the women's bracket didn't know what they were talking about. The 3s should have been the 2s because none of the 2s made that trek to the Elite Eight, whereas all the 3s did. So that kind of cost you a little bit. Pete, you started off, I know there was a little bit of a mistake in terms of sign up anyway, so I know this was a last minute effort for you because you're usually putting in a much stronger effort. But on the plus side, you get your money back. Not the worst thing in the world. On the men's side, we got a few more to talk about because obviously it's a slightly more populated pool this year. We'll see what happens next year. So there's a few more places to dish out. So starting from the bottom up, the big 3-way tie and Lara and Riley, Leela, and Taylor. This was a massive kind of tie at the end. I've already kind of arranged with you what I think is the best way to go forward there. Now, some of you, one in particular, really did, I think, want the tiebreaker. The other people didn't seem to be as cool with it. So we're going to keep it as is. Plus, I mean, come on. Now we've got the youngest people ever in the payout. 2 people. Combined age still makes them the youngest because we do have someone in Leela that's, I believe, 2 months old-ish. So well done. If you can start your life off, you haven't even made it to a year birthday at this point, and yet you've already cashed in on a bracket pool. That warms my heart just more than a little bit. We had another tie in this one for 5th place. So this is 5th and 6th between Tom and Shay. And while Tom did have a very radical but common sense solution to this to bring real life height into it, to essentially points per inch, I think he might have had a different strategy on that one, or maybe a devious kind of, he thought ahead and did the math, but they did decide to go with the tie there. So congratulations to you both. Pretty happy that I get to send some back in your way. So well done there. 4th place and 2-time back-to-back Western Hemisphere champion. I wish I had belts to send people because you know I would. Kevin Chain, congratulations, buddy. It's a 4th place. I know you're hoping for a bit more, but again, you took UConn, which a lot of people did. We did have, I think it was over 20 people that picked UConn, so only 7 of those people, well, 8, 9, I guess, total, get to be on the list here. So feel fortunate that at least you took down the Western Hemisphere because that does bump it up just a little bit for you. In 3rd place, we did have Rennie, and also Rennie not only taking home the 3rd purse, but as you can see, the Swiss Kenya bracket that I put together because it kind of made sense. I don't know what I'm going to do next year, but we'll see. Congrats on taking that down. So that's a double purse for you on that one. I know this was actually intelligent on your part. This is why sometimes having more than one bracket and betting with your head instead of your heart, because I know your heart's going to just bleed Tar Heel blue. And I'm sure there was a bracket that went down earlier on that front, but common sense dictated that maybe one with UConn as well. And that certainly helped you out. But once again, 2nd year in a row, we have a tie for 1st. But the reason why I think this is amazing, these are 2 people that are now new to winning this pool, so that we had to add 3 people to the haul. That always makes me happy. Congratulations, Penny and Jake. So Jake, just quickly, it's the running joke that I keep making reference to because I think at some point in time it'll stop. But you are probably on the receiving end of a podium finish in more than I would like to admit in terms of some of the pools I run. You've already had a phenomenal year. In fact, both winners, Laura was placed in the Genevan fantasy football league that was run this year. She doesn't live in. She was a call-in. She was a second on the phone to a team that made the finals. Jake actually won we call it the Brussels League, but I think one person currently lives in Brussels. It started there, and so we keep it there. So Jake, you've already won that pool this year. You placed. You were a podium finish in the NFL playoff pool, and now you're starting 24 off right with. This is your 3rd kind of victory of the calendar year, or at least placement in the calendar year. This one puts you in the hall, so congratulations to that. Plus, you make it now the 2nd complete couple that are in there. Jackie won last year, and I won when I first started this pool. So you and Kelly are now both there, so bragging rights can be equal in the household, so congrats for that one. Penny, Vreugdenhil, unbelievable effort. So proud of you. This is now, if we're talking about people who've won, this is the first godchild connection that I'm aware of. You are the youngest person to ever take the title. You are the first Vreugdenhil. Now, your sister did get in the money last year, so you weren't the first Vreugdenhil to make some money on it. And I think your dad and mom may have been close before, but they've never won it. So you're the first one in the household to take a title. Congratulations, Penny. I know when people's kids, or in my case, dogs, fill out brackets, you're never sure who, if it's just the parent doing another one or whatever else. I can tell you with certainty that Penny picked this bracket, because P is for Purdue and P is for Penny, and they were in the finals, but they couldn't match the puppy power of the Huskies. So congratulations, Penny. Phenomenal pick. And if you are not aware, hopefully by the time this comes out, I can get this beforehand, but this comes in a week that you will actually add a year to your age. You're going to be blowing out the birthday candles later on this week. So an early birthday present from all of us to please make sure you spend our money well. I mean, I would say obviously as much candy and toys as you can get, or if you want just like a really loud air horn, so every morning you can wake your dad up just to remind him that you won this pool before he did. That's how I would maybe take care of that. But I'm probably in the minority on that one. So once again, congrats to everybody. Big prize pool this year. Really happy to do it. So to the winners go the spoils. Congrats. As I said, this is a very melancholy time for me. I love wrapping this up. I love that we just had a tournament, but I already miss March and I wish it was March again. But a couple quick things. Number one, huge thank you to anyone who's been watching these, reading some of the articles or following along on this. I appreciate you coming in the pool. I know it's a lot of work on my end, but I really do appreciate it and I do enjoy it. Now, there is one other topic I did want to talk about a little bit just because it's become a topic. You're going to notice I did not mention much about it, but I am going to write about it. So if you think something's missing, there's a narrative out here that got a little bit political, and I don't think it should be. I'm going to write just a few of my opinions about that. So read the write-up if you want all that stuff. I'm just trying to keep it more about the pool here. But again, massive thanks. I know you don't ask me to do all the write-ups, and some of you probably don't even read your own that much, but I like doing it. So here's my pre-pitch. You're going to hear from me again in March, and one of the messages you're going to hear from me is, please send me your stuff as soon as you have them. I think we learned from this year, the people who won didn't necessarily take the whole week to do their research and do their bracket. So do whatever's comfortable for you. But if you're the kind of person who's done a day or two before or likes to do it right away, please send it to me, because now we got over 100 things that I have to come up with, and that gets pretty taxing. But anyway, another season come and gone. If you are a sports fan, you know now, though, it's the Mecca. We got Masters coming up. Baseball has started. Basketball is about to be in the playoffs. Hockey's about to be in the playoffs. Great time to be a sports fan. So hopefully I will hear from all of you at some point in time very soon, or you'll hear from me. But if not, I'll see you next March.